Welcome to B-Sides and good morning. Today we're going to talk about LinkedIn OPSEC targeting analysis and countermeasures. It's a subject that I've researched for many years now and have had the opportunity to speak about different elements of it to both closed groups, open groups, and many different people. Many researchers and I have shared our challenges around social media together. But as to my background, you can find it, you can figure it out. The most important thing for me to get through in the beginning, of course, is my employer statement. And my views, research, and the data expressed in this deck are my own. They do not reflect the views of my current or previous employers. So when you look at the current state of social media, it's important to look back at the past. The campaigns that were put out there, and they're propaganda campaigns in some cases, but humans were a means to an end of an adversary. This was always the concern during the Second World War and going into the Cold War. I don't think things have changed that much, and maybe we're due for a campaign of this level, and maybe recent events will push us there. You know, I've seen things that make me think we need to go in this direction again. And maybe a sign for this could be the historical parallel today is maybe it's loose social media profiles sync corporations, sync governments, sync industry. That's the way I think about it, and hopefully I'll shift some of your views on it. So the threat that we're discussing today is targeting against LinkedIn. Every adversary, be it a nation state or a for-profit, a financially motivated adversary, they all use LinkedIn. Some do it better than others. Some are willing to do more with it than others. And to tell a good story with data, you use a threat actor. And I've done this many times looking at North Korea, or Lazarus groups specifically. And I found it interesting that they were targeting security researchers that were researching them and targeting hackers. So that was interesting. And secondly, they were targeting COVID-19 research, and that'll play into the data that drives the story for today. So in 2018, the Senate had a hearing. There have been multiple follow-ups to those hearings. The focus of those hearings was, of course, on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter is a giant echo chamber. It's great, but we know what it is. We know what damage it can potentially do. I think it's not too much. Facebook, it's targeted advertising that can potentially influence someone. But the platform that has the data about what you do and what you have access to is LinkedIn. So my question has always been, was the focus in the right place? And maybe that focus has been adjusted. I'm from the outside looking in like most of us. So I'm hoping it will be adjusted. So I like to always include some definitions because many of us at B-Sides are new. OSINT is what I do. It's what many of us do. You're working to the left before the adversary executes an operation. That's where we want to spend our energy. It's passive adversary reconnaissance through publicly available means to allow for collection, analysis, and targeting. And OPSEC is your duty to understand what data is available to an adversary, how you protect that data, and the responsibilities in protecting it. That responsibility doesn't just fall on an individual. It falls onto a platform. It falls onto a corporation. If you exhibit that you have access to my data, I believe are the responsibilities of LinkedIn, of Twitter, of Facebook. Corporate responsibility, if I work for a corporation and you are exhibiting that you have access to my crown jewels, I want to have data that lets me know that you're likely to be targeted. And as an individual, you don't want to be the one to be targeted. You don't want to be the reason that your company is breached. So targeted user analytics was a thing that I put together, a project that I put together, a white paper and an attack model and a data model that combined red and blue team capabilities to identify and reduce this attack surface to our users. ARM is the attract, retain, and monetize model. You're the product, and that's something you need to constantly be aware of. I think in our community, we understand this, but in order to monetize and attract more people to the platform, your data needs to be sold. It needs to be made available. That's the key to growing the model and why I don't care for it. And then HIBP is I've been pwned. We all know what that is. So my hypothesis is that our adversaries are using LinkedIn to harvest and target users with access to targeted data or systems, and data-driven models can be built to simulate adversary behavior using openly available gathered data from social media platforms. Targets can be externally enriched using OSINT data, breach data, and through other methods. And internal enrichment, there's internal data sets that are only available to us as defenders, and they're extremely valuable when correlated against the targeting data models. It gives you a complete picture. And that's the basis of the countermeasures. So the questions that I asked to arrive at these conclusions with targeted user analytics were simply who has access. I did this, for many years, not thinking about what I was doing, but I looked outside to correlate against inside, and I've sort of formalized the process. What is the probability that someone has access? What can go wrong from the adversarial perspective? And what story does the available acquisition of enrichment? And finally, what countermeasures can we introduce? This includes OPSEC for hardening our users, training them on what they're exposing, hardening our environment, and deceiving an adversary. Incident scenario where it starts, but you don't really need to look at the right. If you get to the far right on recovery, you're at the game over point. If you work to the left, and MITRE has a pre-attack model, and I've talked with MITRE about some of my work before as well, and the reconnaissance phase, that's where you want to focus your energy. That's where you want to generate data, because those are the people, and that if people are the means to the end, that will be targeted first. I want to increase the cost and complexity to performing reconnaissance against an organization, and the adversary will move on to the next person. If you're the bear in the middle of the herd, or you're at the front of the pack on the left side of targeting engagement, the adversary will move on to the next person. And that's somewhere that you want to be. So I simplified this process. I may get the opportunity to show you the drawn out full data model, but I may not in the short period of time that we have. So again, it's target acquisition, and acquisition is defined by keywords, keyword matching. A harvest is matching those keywords to people, matching them to humans. And an acquisition score is the number of keyword matches you get about a potential target. And enrichment is, and all of this you can do yourself. You don't need anything complex. It's a human with a web browser, access to a search engine, Excel, that can get you started. But enrichment is OSINT, of course, the breach data footprint, and I consider that to be meta breach data, because we're not going to take in breach data. And that's where Have I Been Pwned comes in. And the internal enrichment is phishing metrics. If someone knows about a person inside your network and they know they have access, why not take the easy approach and spearfish them more? So you can correlate that type of data, for example, and other behaviors that you're looking for against these potentially high-risk users inside your enterprise. Again, our countermeasures are hardening our users, personas, and creating human sensors. So as a view of your organization, this is a high-level view. This would be a typical organization. A high-risk user would be someone with an extensive set of keywords. If you have 20 keywords, maybe you have a 17 keyword match, and they're publicly available on the open internet. A highly attractive defensive persona, if you were to create that persona, it would have approximately those same number of keywords. Don't be more than the average to a high number of keywords, or you'll look too good to be true. You won't pass the smell test. A low-risk user, that's your general users in your environment. If an adversary persona in the final block makes a connection to a low-risk user, they become high-risk simply because they've given their profile data to that persona. And you always want to match keywords against targets. That's the key. So for responsible research and preconditions, I've looked into this extensively, and before I talked at DEF CON some time ago, I pointed out a particular case that I thought was interesting because it started in California. But is it legal to use a search engine to perform unauthenticated search against LinkedIn to pull user-generated data? That's browsing the internet using a search engine. And the answer is yes. And you can see the LinkedIn versus HIQ ruling that has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. There are some more decisions related to that that need to be made, but that is where we are today. Can we use public data sources for enrichment? The answer is yes. Can researchers aggregate and pull in breach data to build a complete targeting model for the targets identified in the model? The answer to that is no. We can't do that, but we can use have I been pwned to generate a 1 or a 0 based on interesting data fields that are a match. We know that the bad guys leverage breach data sets in aggregate against users to target them today. This has been a growing problem. It's only gotten bigger. The various collections and things that are aggregated and resold. So you want to remove the value of that data set to an adversary using any means that you have at your disposal. And can we create defensive personas in social media platforms? The answer is sometimes, I believe. So LinkedIn adversary platform targeting methods, these are the 3 primary methods that the adversaries utilize. Unauthenticated, again, that's what my research follows, Google foo or Google dorking. Web scraping with Python. Authenticated users are in the network, they're personas, or they're typically personas, or they could be recruiters, or they could be a persona recruiter. We don't have metrics on how many personas or persona recruiters have ever been created in this platform. So the data products are the third-party aggregator products like HIQ generates and DataSift, the product that LinkedIn has someone sell. DataSift also sells data products for Facebook, for Twitter. So if you didn't think of LinkedIn as a social media platform, their whole model is based on this and they use the same mechanisms. So you should maybe change the way you think. The LinkedIn potential use cases, I've looked at anything, and I think it's only to the limit of your imagination. That's all you can do, and you can find anything. But today I focused in on biomedical and pharmaceutical. And for biopharmaceutical, the interesting time that we're in made the vaccine research data very interesting. And who has access to vaccine research data is a question. What could go wrong if people with access to vaccine research data are collected from LinkedIn? And the basic methods to enumerate targets from LinkedIn data, and then in modeling the attack surface and the countermeasures that can be employed. So this is a basic Boolean string or a search engine string that could be, you could use advanced search, or you could just add this string and add keywords. If you want to try this at home, or adjust your own, and preferably manner to defend your company and or your interests. The seed file is a set of keywords that indicate that someone may have or likely has access to the target. I don't have any maps or models to show today, but what you can expect, and this could be any vertical, but for any vertical this would apply. Keyword matching to identify high value targets. Seed files are grown based on common skills amongst harvested targets. If 3 or more targets, if you have a set of individuals that look like a good target mapped to your profile, if 3 or more have a common skill, then add it to the seed file. That's how you grow a keyword file. You find common skills amongst targets and you add it to the seed file. The geolocation, where the people that have access to the targeted data are located. If you're looking for a job in a particular area, you provided geodata to LinkedIn platform, or you may leak that in your profile. I'm looking for a job in this area. I did this with this person here. And that is another factor that you need to consider. Identified targets reveal peers in industry. From outside, it's unauthenticated, it's more difficult, but you can find collaboration by way of language that's distributed publicly. Org chart mapping of relationships between targets. Targets have titles that are assigned a value, be it a manager, an employee, a VP, whatever it may be. And phishing is always based on this hierarchy. Somebody that is very senior in an organization asking someone that is very junior to take an action. And we can use this data set to build out the phishing methodology that will be utilized. And identifying these targets, and these targets, once identified, will be targeted repeatedly. Because if you have a specialized job, then a single model can be used for years and years. Your career is not likely to change. If you are a senior research scientist, researching COVID vaccine, SARS, or any of the variants, you'll be doing that for the next 20 years. And that's true of any specialized job. So in terms of presenting the data in a way that is safe, was the best that I could do with these type of discussions. Closed discussions with companies are always very different, and with individuals are very different too. But a selection of 4 and an approximate harvest targeting around the top 100 results or more. The average seed match was relatively low. We had 5 on A, 4 on average for B, 7 and for C, and 4 for D. The geodata, at least someone in that subset always leaked geodata. That is always going to be the case, and that can give you a location if the target is a physical location. Unique names are highly problematic, and I'll get more into that simply because of the alignment of breach data to a unique name versus your name is John Smith. It's something very common. So target enrichment for adversaries, again, what OSINT data is available about the harvested targets? A simple Google search can generate more data once you have a name, and a unique name will generate more data unique name will generate more data, of course. And what breach data is available about the harvested targets? So if you have a unique name, you can run a guessing program to firstname.lastname@yahoo.hotmail.gmail, etc., and you can finger on the potential footprint and what breach data is associated with the individual. Again, you could use building a data model for this, a 1 or a 0, because you're just trying to determine if you think someone will be targeted. And then you map that to your attack surface to those vectors. So again, target enrichment for adversaries. There's one item I want you to pay close attention to just because we see so much of it today, and that is for SIM swapping. If it is easy to correlate the phone number and then guess the phone of the individual that may be targeted, and that is the factor that allows someone to get into your corporate environment or other environment, then you want to take measures and make sure that that individual has hardened their access to their telecom provider. But there are lots of elements. And this is a quick visualization. I'm sorry, I'm going to share the slides after because they came out kind of small when I couldn't do the presentation role. But this maps out that org structure, what it would look like for any particular organization once the data is collected. You have a senior scientist in this case, VP Spearfish's senior scientist asked them to share data externally. Maybe that's not an unusual request in an environment that needs to solve a large problem and needs to collaborate heavily. The adversary is already inside your network. They know who to enumerate. They know who has access to the data is another one, and threat number 2. Threat number 3, they're also inside your network. And they're, again, going to compromise vulnerability in infrastructure and target the individuals that have access and attempt to enumerate them. And you can target people high, you can target them low, but I think the phishing piece is the most important piece. And vaccine research is expensive. Why would an adversary pay for it when they could potentially steal it? And that points back to why North Korea took the approach that they did. They're exquisitely good at using the LinkedIn platform, so that should have been a surprise to no one. So I'd like to jump into our countermeasures. So this is what we can do about this problem, and that includes OPSEC training. If you train users on the impact of what they post and the value of breach data and how it can be used against them, you will make them stronger, and you will make all of us stronger, and you will make your organization stronger. Your security awareness training should show actual metrics about your company and what that attack surface looks like. Make it real, make it actionable. And if you show that to a leader in your company, they will want to invest in this type of a program or this type of an adjustment if you already don't have something like this. Create your own targeted user analytics. Learn the keywords, build and maintain a seed file. Search your user base continuously for high-risk data matches and share knowledge. Partner with your employees, create that partnership. Your employees don't want to be the one that causes a breach. They don't want to be the one that is compromised. It's not a good position for them. It's not a good position for us. Human sensors are another countermeasure. You can utilize existing high-risk users as sensors, change their email, change their user ID, move them over. If I have a user that is also a habitual clicker, they've consistently failed phishing tests and they have poor OPSEC, and you will find this correlation if you look at the data. It's there because people that exhibit poor behaviors do them everywhere. You can turn a weakness into a strength by adjusting this and collecting data against them for enhanced monitoring. Building internal deception based on these users and moving them over to a different user ID, a different group, if you're able to do that, it would be a fun activity. And I find too often deception isn't based on reality, and the bad guys move past it. So build it that way. Utilize former employees as sensors. Someone switched a job, they left a stale LinkedIn profile. They have stale artifacts that indicate that they work for your organization, but they don't, and you've defanged their access. You can use them as a canary in the coal mine. Take advantage of their lack of updating. And again, base deception infrastructure upon them. And volunteer an employee as a sensor is another one, because we all know those InfoSec folks that are introverts. They have no public profile. Maybe they should have one that reflects a different skill set than an InfoSec, and align them to a crown jewel and use them as a sensor. They'll have the minds for it, and they'll be hardened to look at the data that may come in both outside and inside. So the next countermeasure is persona development. And this is where I was really focused on OPSEC for years. And I found that it's just like with simulating phishing. You can't solve it, and it's very difficult to solve it because people need to find jobs, and you need to expose keywords to find jobs sometimes. That's just a fact. But personas can help with this. So personas must fit the target profile. Use the same keywords to establish attractive targets. Create relationships with other potential targets or other controlled personas, either in your control. You can also create relationships with adversary personas if you leave one in place. I won't have time to discuss that area. It's a big area, and there's a lot of pros and cons. For success methods, build a deception profile over time. If somebody shows up as a senior virologist or very senior position, and they haven't been in the industry, they haven't been in your organization for a long time, they're too new, and it won't pass the smell test. Start them off, grow them over years. Create multi-platform personas for target validation. I want an adversary to believe that it is real outside of LinkedIn. Build internal corporate deception that aligns to these external artifacts. Again, don't waste your time with a deception program that isn't built from the outside in. LinkedIn issues, there are a few that I will talk about, but again, this could be talked about for quite a while. User responsibility versus LinkedIn responsibility in regard to the ARM model. I think that a lot of the responsibility falls on the platform. And I'll leave it at that. Users can do so much, but the platform needs to help them. When there are individuals that are endangering us, it is a platform responsibility. And I believe regulation will one day, and I'd like to see it happen sooner rather than after something. But it's gone on for a long time, but I believe that will come. And 2019 was the first time LinkedIn announced the number of personas they removed, and there were 21 million of them. And prior years, my theory is that they were not announced because prior to the Microsoft and LinkedIn, we should be talking about Microsoft because it is Microsoft. Those metrics were not made available because the valuation of any social media platform is based on the number of users. And a high number of users meant a higher valuation for the acquisition. So my questions for LinkedIn: have shell companies bought data products from LinkedIn? How many persona recruiters have been detected since today or prior to 2019? Does LinkedIn plan to inform users if they were contacted or exposed to a known persona? Because I've talked with groups that have run into this scenario, and it was them contacting and getting that response and having to work hard to get a response. But seeing that proactive data would be extremely helpful. And I always want to understand the capital investment that has been made into security as a percentage of profit. I want to see those metrics, and I think we all would, and particularly when we're protecting against state threats. So my proposal is that LinkedIn should protect US interests by offering platform level protections first to special users. Users that align with critical infrastructure, for example. I think this is a responsibility that they must undertake. I think Microsoft should be pressured by regulators to force this again. And I think LinkedIn needs to force a security review. Facebook did it, and Facebook's data was not nearly as important for all users because people have had their settings set up for such a long time, and they do not realize that you can use a search engine to glean this data, some of this profile data. And it's such a large number of people that don't understand it that why not have a security review? The answer is because it would lower the value of the platform and the ARM model. But I think it should happen because if Facebook did it, why not LinkedIn? And LinkedIn should consider selling or providing free deception products. Why not introduce something that's a potential profit center into a platform that can also benefit all of us and benefit our corporations? I would sign up immediately for something like this if they were to provide it. I would love to help them make it, to be honest, but I'd like to see them do it. And LinkedIn should offer a pay-for product. Of course, we always say this when we talk about these platforms. To offer an encryption scheme that only shares our data with our trusted networks and have an opt-in model. I would pay for this. There's a large number of us that would be willing to pay for us. Don't monetize me, let me pay what is needed. And, I mean, it may not matter what the cost is. I think we'll pay. And, I think that's the gist of it. So in terms of OPSEC, what not to post, keywords that indicate you have access to sensitive business data, systems or processes. Keywords that indicate you have access to classified data, facilities, or programs. If you work in the government, you can count on the training in this area. That's one thing that is done well. Pictures with metadata that could reveal or connect you to a coworker, or you or a coworker to a sensitive location. Maybe you and a coworker if you're both in the photo. And we can get into what platforms strip out EXIF data. LinkedIn does, Facebook does, Twitter does, but there are other places to find photos that don't. And keywords with specific tools you use to protect your enterprise. As part of an operation, an adversary will want to know, obviously, what technologies you're utilizing, and there's all kinds of ways that the corporations leak this data. Make sure you don't do it as an individual. And what to be aware of, your social media footprint, the breach data set that can be used against you. Those two married together equal a high-risk scenario for many of our interests. We need to remove the value of breach data, and we need people, corporations, these platforms, and all of us to work together against the social media footprint issues. And so what to do? Assume breach, assume exposure, and don't be the reason that your company is breached. No one wants to be that reason. So the summary and actions to round it all out is that LinkedIn data is actively used by our adversaries to target our interests. Targeting models built on this data can be reused outside of the platform forever, or as long as your career lasts if you're specialized. Blue teams should use LinkedIn data to model high-risk users. Red teams should use LinkedIn data to simulate adversary targeting, and personas of all types are prevalent in the platform, and you should consider building them as sensors. OPSEC is a user, platform, and corporate shared responsibility. We need to push the bar on this, or we're going to all be in trouble. And that is it.